Welcome back. Welcome aboard, everyone. For those folks that did not view the first video for Section 1, I am reviewing the Associate Cloud Engineer objectives, or outline as they call it. We're going to cover Section 2 in this video. Let's go ahead and talk about planning and estimating GCP product use in the pricing calculator. Now, on the exam, there are certainly a few questions on pricing. And I was a little bit surprised that they would, go and require you as a cloud engineer to memorize how the pricing is done, for example, BigQuery or Bigtable. I won't mention exactly the exact service per se, but I will sort of walk you through what you need to know. Now, what you want to do is go over to the Google Cloud Platform Pricing Calculator. Now, we have right here the pricing calculator. Now, let's say BigQuery. Okay. Now, BigQuery is actually what? It's a big data warehouse is what it is. It's for big data. It's a very powerful service. Again, if you're not familiar with BigQuery, it's a managed service. But let's say, for example, you're using the pricing calculator. On the exam, they wanted you to know, for example, on, let's say, BigQuery, but let's say Cloud Data Store as well. You need to know how the pricing is done, believe it or not. Now, with BigQuery, for example, it's priced on demand or a flat rate. Now, there's different rate plans, and you need to be aware of what the additional charges could be, like with storage. So when you're setting up BigQuery, know that it is basically priced on demand or flat rate. However, on demand or flat rate, there's still additional costs that you will pay around storage and queries, for example. We go to flat rate, again, storage pricing, but the flat rate plan includes, again, a specific amount, like flat rate 40. If you just go here, right, that's the scale that you're using. Basically, this allows you to use a service, and if you exceed that free amount, for example, with storage that you're using, then you'll have to pay for additional storage. And again, it's based on what you need. Once again, remember BigQuery, know how it's priced. Let's go over to, for example, App Engine. Okay, now App Engine. Remember, App Engine has what? A couple different environments, right? It's got standard and it has flexible. Let's say, for example, you want to use App Engine standard. You have to put in what? Instances per hour. Flexible environment is priced different, if you see that, as well as the APIs and other services like task queues, for example. So you may want to take a little bit of time and look at how pricing is done and make sure you understand, especially around the managed services, how the pricing is done, right? Data proc. Let me go over here to Cloud SQL. Now, Cloud SQL is, again, there's different ways you're going to pay for this. Be aware with Cloud SQL, again, this is again more location based. Remember, it's regional, and just be aware of how you're going to pay for this. Now let's go back to the objectives. So remember the pricing calculator. Do expect questions on the pricing calculator, and I would highly recommend you pay attention to managed services when it comes to pricing. Okay, number 2, planning and configuring compute resources. Now, once again, you need to understand the workloads, and I would highly recommend you go back to the pricing calculator and understand how pricing is done. Now, go over here to pricing as well. I put the pricing page right there. make sure you understand how you can calculate costs, understand pricing details. So BigQuery, let's go to BigQuery. Doing this for a reason, my friends. Understand how the pricing's done. Now, basically with BigQuery, it's flat rate for storage and a usage rate for queries. Again, be aware of that. Now, there's also cost control mechanisms. Pricing summary is what? You get charged based on the storage, the number of queries, and other operations, right? And again, this is based on the region, right? The multiple regions that are available. And you don't need to know the regions, but again, I'm talking about pricing for a reason. You should expect to see something on that. All right. Okay, let's go back here. Now, let's talk about virtual machines. When it comes to virtual machines, it's really important. Looking at my notes, I had, let's see. Okay, now, when it comes to custom machines, first of all, you want to know why you want to use a custom machine or a preemptible VM over each other. And there's very good reasons to use a preemptible VM versus a custom machine. Now, a preemptible VM is essentially a spot instance. For those of you, really familiar with AWS, it's like a spot instance. It allows the service provider to give you a cheap rate, but the commitment is only for a specific amount of time, and it's preemptible, meaning what? They could, tell you it's time to go whenever they want. And there isn't much of a warning with it as well. Now, custom machines allow you to do what? Allows you to customize that specific machine. You could go ahead and create the OS, amount of resources you want, any kind of applications you want to layer on it, IAM policies, whatever you so choose. So just be aware of that. Now, when it comes to, let's just make sure we're here. When it comes to compute resources, you need to know basically what is the appropriate service for the appropriate workload, right? The question is going to say customer A is doing this, and they want to manage service. If they want to manage service, don't pick Compute Engine. You may need to go with what? Kubernetes or App Engine, or perhaps Cloud Function. Again, it depends on the question and what the real use case is, but be aware of that. And then we'll talk about preemptible VMs. So let's go back, and I think it was over here. Before we proceed on, let's make sure we understand Compute Engine pricing. Now, Compute Engine does have free usage limits. However, it's based on, of course, the machine type you're using, the region, and so on and so on. So make sure you know what the standard machine types are. Now, Amazon likes to call these machine images, AMIs. And again, you can go ahead and use a custom one, for example. Now, when it comes to pricing, I want to point out one thing before I forget. If you go to sustained use, what is a sustained use? Now, this is effectively, basically a little different in the sense versus like committed use. Basically, it depends on what you're basically using that particular period, that 30-day period generally. I think it's 30 days. And actually, we can verify that here in a second. I should know that. Yeah, 75% of the month. And I think it's based on 30 days, even if it's 31 days in the month or 28 days. I didn't get a good answer, but anyways, you get the point. So sustained use just means if you've exceeded using that VM, you will, again, get a discount based on what you're paying for that, for those VMs, right? And the more you use the VM, the greater the discount. Sustained use. Make sure you know what that is. Now, let's talk about a committed use. What is a committed use discount? Now, this is basically like Amazon's reserved instances. Same thing, right? You're committing. Now, what's actually really unique with this service is that with Amazon, you have to prepay, and Azure, you have to prepay as well. With Google, you don't have to prepay. Basically, you commit to that term, and you're billed based on that term you're committing to on a monthly basis. Now, of course, if you don't keep that commitment, then, there'll I'm sure they'll adjust for that as well. But just be aware. So there's no upfront costs. Again, this is actually really useful. Now, how does the discount work? Again, pay attention to this. Now, one of the questions I want to point out was actually, oddly enough, if you want to know your G Cloud version, make sure you look at that. But again, let's get back to VMs and pricing. Now, if you scroll down here, quotas, you also need to be aware of quotas as well. I would encourage you to look at this page. And when it comes to commitments, right, committed use discount page, again, you go ahead and find that information a couple different ways. You could use console, G-Cloud, or API. Now, if we go to quotas and limits, how to check your quota, right, to see if you're exceeding. The exam is going to test your knowledge on how to validate your quotas. Now, they do expect you to know G-Cloud, so do be aware that if you want to check whatever service they're asking you, it is G-Cloud, the service, like compute, project info, and then describe. Okay, don't get confused by list or show. It's what? Describe. And again, you want to make sure that you are aware of this. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Now, let's talk about data storage. Now, on the exam, they did test storage, I think, fairly well. And I wouldn't say heavily, but you definitely want to know the difference between the options, but also know what the right choice is for the right situation. For example, you want to make sure you use Cloud Spanner versus Cloud SQL in the right situation. If you need to scale horizontally, don't use Cloud SQL per se. It doesn't scale per se. And again, if you have users that are distributed using SQL, you probably want to use Cloud Spanner. But again, read the question. I'm not telling you exactly what you should expect for a question per se, but I'm pointing out for a reason. Also, too, numerous questions on data storage options. Why should you use regional versus nearline or cold line, multi-regional? Again, know your storage. So what I'd recommend is you go over here and read this page. This is going to be very helpful. How to choose the right solution. For example, Cloud Spanner, and again, I'm talking about this for a reason. Cloud Spanner and Cloud SQL. Do you need to scale horizontally? Yes, use Cloud Spanner. If you don't, then don't use it. Again, the costs are very different as well, significantly different versus Spanner and Cloud SQL. So just be aware of that. Now over here again, do you use BigQuery or Bigtable? What is the right choice, right? So take a look at that. And then make sure you read this section here around cloud storage. Make sure you understand the use case for cloud storage. Look at the other services. Like I said, make sure you know the services you'll expect to know. It's not like the cloud architect exam. You shouldn't expect like case studies that make you choose out the right question. That's not what I saw. I saw one diagram and not even really a case study. That was about it. Now, what I want to do is point out this. Now, I would recommend you go to cloud storage page. Once again, I had mentioned knowing your options for cloud storage. It's critical you know this because these are give me questions on the exam. And when I say give me questions, these are really easy to get right if you just memorize the use case for the right access requirements. For example, if a customer needs to use storage and they're going to access those objects, every day, you probably don't want to move them to nearline or cold line, for example. It depends on the access patterns. Again, make sure you know this, okay? And I'm running my mouth. If you're going to access, for example, storage less than once a month, you want to consider nearline. If it's less than once a year, go to what? Cold line. Regional or multi-regional. Why do you want to use both? Or actually either one. If you're concerned about performance in a specific region, then you probably want to look for regional. Multi-regional is going to be where you need to have redundancy. And essentially, costs, again, this is more expensive than this, and this is more expensive than nearline, and so on and so on. So the costs are basically proportional when you go in left to right, right? Now, again, pay attention, and I'm going to just scroll down here. Where was it? Oh, here it is. Migrating. Another area I want you to be really cautious with is go over here on how to migrate from on-prem or cloud to cloud. Let's say you want to migrate from one GCP zone to another, or you want to migrate from your own data center to GCP. What is the right service to use? So pay attention to this as well. Okay, let's go back to the objectives. Now it says network resources. Once again, make sure you know load balancing, know why you want to use HTTP load balancing versus network load balancing. Make sure you know resources, right? Making sure you have the right resources for the right situation. Maybe you need to use content delivery. Maybe you need to set up peering. Maybe there's, something required. Maybe you need to look at other network options. So let's go over to GCP services. And if we go over here, just go over to networking. And this is a good start. Again, just go over here to load balancing. One of the things about this test is again, you don't need to prove how wonderful you are, with designing clouds. It's more, theory and knowing the terminology and the commands. So load balancing. Use network load balancing for the right use case, but also to identify load balancing for HTTP, right? Now, if you need to distribute, okay, again, I'm going to just point out one thing. Okay, if you need to scale across regions, you need to look at HTTP load balancing, right? But if you don't, if you want to scale network-wise, for more regional, then you need to look at network load balancing in most cases. Now, there's also other scenarios. For example, let's go to network load balancing because you will get tested on a few things on this. Another thing, let me look at my notes before I forget. Okay, now as far as forwarding, now here it is. You need to understand load balancing and forwarding. One of the questions will test you basically on how to essentially go over here to ports. Where is it? Here it is. It's the gcloud command. Give me 1 second. I lost here it is. Okay. Take a look at looking at gcloud and making sure you know the command for looking at forwarding rules as well as other services when it comes to load balancing. One more thing I want to cover is Cloud CDN. A question was on Cloud CDN, and you need to know when to use Cloud CDN and how you could integrate it with load balancing. And again, it sort of tells you exactly what you need to know right here. So if you don't know about CDN, I would encourage you to just take a few minutes, read through this, and make sure you understand that CDN is going to work with what load balancing, right? Okay, fairly straightforward. Now, there's another question around, I think it was, here it is, signed URLs. Read this, understand basically why you want to use a signed URL, and understand as well how you can create keys. And you can do it 2 different ways, right? Okay, let's go to the next section. And Cloud DNS. Okay. Now, make sure you know, I won't spend a lot of time on DNS. There was a question around what kind of records could be updated and how you would do that. Do you understand the difference between MX records and other type of records? That's really the focus that you want to look at. Okay, let's proceed on. That's going to wrap up section 2 that I wanted to cover. Next video is on section 3.